millions of people who viewed the trailer online for a documentary called The Drop Box. It's about a church leader in South Korea who's behind a scheme which has seen hundreds of abandoned babies adopted. France 24 went to meet him as the country's seen a drastic rise in the number of babies abandoned anonymously by their mothers. It's an unintended side effect, ironically, of a change to the adoption law last year to reduce unregistered adoptions of children overseas. Marie Linton and Justin McCurry report from Seoul.
This simple box, placed discreetly in a Seoul backstreet, is the last resort for women who believe they're unable to look after their newborn child.
When someone opens the door and leaves a baby inside, a light turns on, and there is a ring to notify people upstairs. The mothers can also talk to us from the street.
Lee installed the baby box outside his orphanage for disabled children in 2009. He says he's never seen so many babies left behind anonymously by their troubled mothers. These days, about 20 babies are left in the box every month, compared to just 2 a month a few months ago. Now the pastor is waiting to transfer 3 infants to the city's social services. Lee says a recently introduced special adoption law is behind the rise in the number of abandoned babies. The law, enacted in August 2012, requires mothers to keep their newborns for at least a week before deciding whether or not to keep them. They must also register the child's birth and give their own names to the authorities. Lee believes the law unfairly punishes single mothers, who are still frowned upon in South Korean society.
The yellow Post-it notes mark out the letters I have received from mothers since the special adoption law was passed. Now I have 3 files full of letters. This one reads, "I'm sorry I gave birth to this child. I'm underage, so I cannot register to birth."
Since the end of the Korean War in 1953, more than 160,000 South Korean children have been adopted overseas. The number of children from South Korea put up for international adoption is among the highest in the world. Some have gone on to become famous in their adoptive countries, such as the French Representative Minister Fleur Pellerin. The new adoption law was supposed to lower the number of abandoned children and stem the flow of those adopted overseas. In fact, since the law was enacted, the number of children left behind illegally and anonymously has increased.
The best thing for a child is to be raised by his mother. If that's impossible, then adoption inside South Korea is the next best option. International adoption should be a last resort, and the adoptive parents must undergo thorough background checks.
INCAS, an organization for adopted South Koreans, is celebrating the Chinese New Year with those who've returned to South Korea to find out about their past. The new adoption law has divided opinion among adoptees. Some believe it'll improve transparency and help adoptees trace their biological parents.
I think it's good to have registration of the mother's name along with the child's name when they're born. So I think it's a really good way for adoptees to try to connect back if they ever do try to do a birth search or want to learn about where they're from.
But others disagree with the crackdown on international adoptions.
I disagree with the prioritization of domestic adoptions. I only know from my experience and my friend's experience back home, but we had great childhoods, and we were very grateful to be adopted.
The number of South Korean children adopted overseas went into decline in the 1980s. It's continued to fall, from about 900 a year to 300 a year since the new adoption law went into effect.
Now we can cross to Seoul and speak to Ross Oak from TRAK. That stands for Truth and Reconciliation for the Adoption Community of Korea. Hello, and thank you very much indeed for being with us. First of all, I'd like to know what you think of the baby box. Is it helping or hindering the plight of the country's unwanted children?
No, I think it's hindering it, actually. It's already been talked about enough in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. The committee for that convention has addressed baby boxes and that they do violate the rights of the child.
And why is that?
Oh, because when you put the child in that box, such as that, first of all, we should address that it is actually illegal to abandon a child. So the fact of that box is illegal. in Korea. Second of all, it violates their rights because they don't have a right to an identity. There's no way for them to trace the parent. So it should go through the proper channels. And when you have a box like that, it doesn't. It's sort of there's been evidence and research done that it actually can encourage abandonment.
Hasn't it had a positive effect on infanticide, though?
There's no actual, well, if you look at the research on even that, there's no actual proof that it does affect infanticide. For one thing, you're talking about there's infanticide and there's neonaticide. And it's usually, baby boxes are usually installed to address neonaticide. But when you look at actually the research on the profile of the mother that commits neonaticide, it's actually been found that in many of the cases that they won't actually use that box due to sudden panic. That's why they may, the baby dies from the mother not sure what choices she has. So the baby box, as for it preventing infanticide or neonaticide, researchers not found that. So,
okay, now let's talk about the law blamed for the sharp increase in abandonments. Is that really the reason why we're seeing more and more mothers abandoning their babies?
Well, people are misinformed about the actual special adoption law and the amendment to that special adoption law. Actually, in the previous law, under Article 7 of the old special adoption law, before it was amended, it was dealing with family registration. So when you're talking about birth registration, the parents have to register the child. That deals with the Family Registration Act. And the new law never changed that. So if you're talking about, everyone talking about birth registration, how the parents have to register the child. But that does not actually deal at all with the special adoption law. That's dealing with the family registration law.
Now, in our report, our correspondents say there's been a decrease in the number of international adoptions. Does that mean then that these babies are being adopted domestically, or what's happening to them?
Well, more of them are being raised by their mothers because there's more support, one thing. Another issue is that, also there's about 90% of the children that go for intercountry adoption are from single mothers. So there's actually not a lot of support for those unmarried mothers. But if you provide that support for them, then they can raise their child. Yes, there is stigmatism, and yes, there is discrimination, but there's also a lot of mothers that do, and it's increasing actually. So that's one case that's why you're also seeing a decrease. Another case why you're seeing a decrease is that after the special adoption law, yes, it did make it put more control because it now has to go through the family court. So that can be another reason too as well for the decrease.
But why do so many unwed mothers feel they can't raise their children?
Well, you have they don't have a lot of support systems there. The government doesn't provide a lot of support for them. I believe that actually now the government provides like about 75,000 won, which is about, I would want to say probably around $70 or so. That's one reason. Another reason is like, for example, with the baby box, because actually our group, along with some unwed mothers, we were actually in the area of the baby box, and we did encounter some of the mothers there. And, we had talked to some of the mothers that were going to leave the child at the box, and they had said that if they knew about different kinds of support, because nobody actually tells them about support, then they would keep the child. So people are not giving them the information, and the media is not actually helping in some regards, either because they are just saying that, okay, it's a special adoption law is creating this problem, when actually it's the perception of the special adoption law is creating the problem. It's not actually the special adoption law. So
there's misinformation, and then there's also social attitudes towards women who are single. And what about handicapped children? Isn't that part of the problem as well?
What do you mean by that exactly?
The social stigma?
Is there a social stigma towards it? Yeah, but there's not a lot of support either for children, disabled children. When it comes to adopting disabled children. But what needs to happen, instead of saying, okay, we should send these children, when you're talking about disabled children, we should send these children for intercountry adoption because we can't provide for them. Korea is a wealthy enough country where it could provide for them. It does need the infrastructure, and it needs to have the programs. But to say that, okay, we're just going to send them abroad, well, that's discrimination against disabled children.
Is there much support for the amendment to the law domestically? What were reactions in Korea?
Yeah, there is support. There is support. Well, the point of the law too was it should be mentioned that this law was drafted not only by it was also drafted by adoptees, It was drafted by a group of unmarried mothers. So it is drafted. It's a lot of the provisions of that law are from people that are directly affected by this law, directly affected by adoption. So I would say that the overall, some people don't like it. Well, it depends what they read in the media. But the point of it was, too, is as Korea moves towards ratifying the Hague Convention on intercountry adoption, this law was supposed to take it one step closer to that. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Ross Oak, for joining us from Seoul. Just a reminder that you're from TRAC, the Truth and Reconciliation for the Adoption Community of Korea. We're going to go now to a short break. When we come back, I'll have the headlines for you, and we'll be crossing live to our correspondent in Ukraine, where Yulia Tymoshenko has announced she's running in May's presidential election. Stay tuned for that and plenty more.